Hello, Internet beings! Today we're kicking off a set of guides for how to build each character, starting off with Crown Prince, the adorable and vicious cat, our very first hero. We're going to look at what Crown Prince does best, break down the three main builds, and take a look at scroll and weapon priority. Before we dive into the guide, a couple quick notes. One, Gunfire Reborn is a roguelite game, meaning this will not be something you can copy and paste and follow in every run. This is intended to be a set of priorities that gives you an idea of what works well and is efficient so that you have some guidance based on what you find in a particular run. 2, every character is going to have weapon and scroll priorities. We aren't going to rank every single weapon or scroll, and there will be other opportunities and combinations that are viable. This guide simply provides some effective combinations for the hero so you know what to watch for. Spiritual blessings will be covered in their own separate video. Finally, updates to the game will create some changes to the information provided. As those patches come out, I will go over them and adjust the things you need to know so that you can always be up to date. So what does Crown Prince do best? This character is a master of elemental fusions with one of the most useful secondary skills in the game. The Prince's grenades leave a pool of corrosion on the ground, dealing damage over time and applying the elemental effect. This slows enemies and opens them up to easy application of two fusion effects, miasma and explosion, which is where Crown Prince's damage will come from in the majority of runs. With that in mind, let's take a look at the Ascension talents. There are three primary builds for Crown Prince: the Elemental build, the Grenade build, and a Sniper build. The first two are quite flexible, while the Sniper build does have some more stringent requirements, but is quite fun when it comes together. Let's take a look at the main build path that you can focus on in each run. The first build is going to be the default for a few reasons. It caters to the largest number of weapons, is extremely flexible, and plays to Crown Prince's primary strength, elemental damage. As such, we're going to put a very high priority on all the elemental damage talents, while also gaining a bit of survivability through elemental shield and control through power source. Let's briefly break this down. In our high priority category, we have Elemental Rage and Elemental Shield. Rage gives a massive damage boost as long as we're applying elemental effects, and Elemental Shield is one of the best survival tools available. From there, we look at the three elemental specific options. You can look to focus in on one of these from very early on in the run. Acid Dominance is especially strong if you can get it to tier 3, however it is a bit weaker because we generally won't be using a corrosion weapon, meaning the damage boost won't be as effective in the later stages. And Power Source is always a strong pickup, giving you extra control over your opponents, which can be especially important before you have manipulation up and running with Gemini effects later on. For the rest of the talents, I want to say that the average talents are always okay to pick up and touch on a couple of specific talents below that. Energy Echo seems like it would be a solid pickup, but is highly situational. As of right now, it only gains the elemental effect of the weapon being held, even if you have a Gemini effect. While guaranteeing the elemental effect can be useful, it is still very limited in scope and opportunity, making it a weaker Ascension overall. Wildfire isn't inherently all that bad, as increasing rate of fire does generally mean more consistent application of elemental effects, but compared to the other options, it's generally a weak choice. Finally, you will see Backpack Expansion as one to avoid in every build, even the Grenade build. Between the talents, Expert Proficiency and Battlefield Support, you will rarely, if ever, run out of grenades. As a note, when we talk about weapon priority, we are talking about the weapons you are going to use later in the run. In the early stages, just use what is strongest to make your life easier, and be more selective as you reach the desert where you will likely find your final weapons. Also, it is worth noting that a weapon with a strong set of inscriptions will often be worth using even if it is lower on the tier list, as the power of some of these inscriptions will make them particularly potent, even if they are less so on average. We are naturally going to prioritize elemental weapons. We want to avoid corrosion weapons, generally speaking, as our secondary ability can automatically proc that elemental effect. With that, we want to prioritize other two elements, fire and lightning, and eventually use the Gemini system to apply all three effects. We want to prioritize the higher rate of fire weapon, generally speaking, as you will have a higher chance of triggering fusion effects. Let's break it down a bit further. At the top, we have the best rapid fire, lightning, and fire weapons. Quick to apply damage with generally solid stats until you have the demon lore unlocked. The Crimson Fire scale can be at the top with the rest of these as well. Honestly, it's a pretty great weapon and should be at the top of the list anyway. Dual Fang is the only other way to apply all three elemental effects through just your weapons using a lightning secondary. This can be useful against bosses that are extremely difficult to damage with the grenades, such as the Wind God and the Serpent. The one drawback is that you will lose out on the bonus damage against unarmored enemies that you gain through using a fire weapon, as the Dual Fang alternates between fire and corrosion damage. That said, Doug is adorable and quite fun to use. In our average category, we have those weapons that have a slower rate of fire and smaller elemental effect chance, making them generally weaker options. I specifically want to touch on the situational category. The two swords have excellent elemental effect chance attached to them. This makes them some of the best weapons to use as a secondary with the Gemini effect, such as pairing the Star Devourer with the Fire Tower. This increases fusion chances significantly, even if you never actually use the weapon itself. Talisman can be a useful Gemini weapon as well. Equip it, set it to its elemental type, and throw it in your secondary slot. You can pair it with whatever weapon you find, be it fire or lightning. The only drawback is that it has a very low elemental effect chance, making it a second choice in most situations. Finally, the pupil is an okay weapon that can be useful if you specifically find scrolls that you want to be closer to the enemy. This weapon priority list also carries over pretty effectively to the next build, though you are less reliant on the elemental effects for your damage, opening up some possibilities if you find stronger weapons. This build is, of course, the grenade build. For this, we're going to hone in on the damage dealt by our secondary skill. This can be particularly helpful in higher difficulties, as you can throw a grenade, hide, wait for the enemy to die. You don't always have to pursue this less aggressive approach, but if you're low on health and in this build, it's nice to have the option. The build itself is pretty straightforward. Prioritize the grenade damage talents. Acid Dominance is a bit more potent here than the elemental build, as your primary damage will be through the grenades, with Elemental Rage still being a strong option when the grenade talents are not available. This build is fantastic for getting through the actual stages, but does have some weaknesses against the Wind God and Abyssal Serpent. If you feel confident in your ability to dodge those bosses' abilities, or you're playing with a teammate who is focused on boss killing, then this build makes the between stages relatively easy, even at higher levels. I will note that while you don't have to prioritize elemental effects as highly, Miasma in particular will be very important in higher reincarnation levels in order for your damage to keep up. Our final build is a bit of an anomaly and has some pretty strict requirements. It is easiest to go for when you have the Ultimate Gambler Spiritual Blessing. If you want to try and force the build, reroll at the first mushroom until you hit it to have the best chance of getting there. Otherwise, you will only want to go into this if you find the mandatory talent, Energy Blade, very early on. Let's break it down. Energy Blade is the focus of this build. Every time you use Energy Orb, it buffs the next attack and causes it to deal damage to enemies in an area around your target. With this, a good sniper rifle and Crit X Gemini, you can deal a truly crazy amount of damage after every Energy Orb. The downside of the build, it is heavily reliant on the Energy Orb cooldown, which is why at least one rank and power source is also pretty mandatory. Otherwise, the build can feel a bit clunky. That said, if you can keep your distance, either thanks to good positioning or a teammate willing to go up and draw the attention, it can be potent and fun, giving a different option to the usual cat runs. One quick note on the talents. Piercing Flame can be incredibly potent in this build and lets you prioritize Pyro Dominance, giving your talents a bit more flexibility. If you find yourself with a lot of elemental talents, you can still go for the elemental Shared Gemini instead of the Crit X, but it will cost you a bit of damage. But it will let you take advantage of at least one potent elemental effect with whatever powerful sniper rifle you find. Now that we have a good grasp on builds, let's take a quick look at scrolls that are a high priority for Crown Prince. I will cover scrolls as a whole in a future video, so today we are only focused on the scrolls that are particularly potent or not so you know what to prioritize that is specific to the prince. I'm also going to focus on the first two builds for this as there is a lot of crossover. For the sniper build, you can use the same priority as Lalo. For both builds, the elemental scrolls are a high priority. The shards are particularly potent, giving large increases to particular damage types. If you have a shard, the corresponding enthusiast also goes up in value. We are also going to prioritize skill damage, though it is less important for the elemental build than the grenade build. Let's touch on a few things in a bit more detail. The ring scrolls. Blazing Hoop, Magnetic Field, and Realm of Corrosion are all generally solid. Blazing Hoop and Magnetic Field are particularly potent as they give you the additional elemental effect you wouldn't have otherwise. Fisher Bearpaw doubles your elemental effect chance on every weapon shot, increasing your overall damage. It is worth noting that Crown Prince has the slowest movement speed in the game, slightly behind Aobai and Tao. Corruption Enthusiast is a huge risk as a result, and the damage reduction does not scale well as you progress through the difficulties. Finally, Flesh and Bone. I say this is bad, specifically because Crown Prince has two hero talents that boost your shield recovery, and the best survival ascensions we have are based off of shields as well. This scroll entirely negates those benefits. However, if you avoid those, get Flesh and Bone, Fire Enthusiast, and Resilient Life, it could be a potent survivability option. With that, you are ready to claw your way to the highest difficulties. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and don't forget to post some of your favorite combinations in the comments below and share your own tier lists with us in Discord. Thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it. I would really appreciate if you would like and subscribe. And thank you guys again for watching. I appreciate y'all.